Okay, so I will be talking a bit about tourism. Now, tourism is the biggest industry today.
Yeah.
The growth of tourism has been amazing. If you see in that graphic, 25 million in 1950 and 1,800 million in 2030. The yellow part is Asia. Asia is having the lion's share in the growth of tourism, and China particularly, both as a receiving country and as a country that sends tourists outside. So the tourism grows both from developed and developing countries. We have important middle class emerging in countries like China, like India, like Russia, and this will be one of the major elements of the growth of tourism in the next year. One interesting element is that you see that tourism continues to go stronger in destinations which are already strong. So the first 10 destinations in the world will actually gather for a bit half of the new tourists that will be traveling around in the next 10 or 15 years. Now, tourism produces a lot of good impacts. 10% of GDP, 1 out of 11 jobs. Often for developing countries, it is the only sector that can produce some wealth for the country, for small islands. And it also economically pays off. We've done a study and looked at the tourism from a green perspective, and we found some interesting conclusion. If you apply some green parameters in your tourism industry, you basically get a much better scenario than if you continue with the business as usual scenario. You have less emission, you have energy reductions, and you create almost 20% more jobs than if you continue with the business as usual system. Now, tourism has been increasingly recognized by the United Nations as a sector that contributes to the development. And the development, sustainable development goals, the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, they too refer explicitly for tourism in the list 3 of the goals. Now, what are the key concepts of sustainable tourism? In my view, today we should always add sustainable to tourism. It would be impossible to continue to grow at the pace that we're growing if we're not applying a sustainable approach to tourism. So what are the key concepts? Tourism is driving economic growth. This is the new airport in Madrid. It's creating jobs and opportunities everywhere, foster poverty reduction, promote and preserve cultural values and heritage, protect the planet and its biodiversity, can build bridge for peace and understanding. This is the good side of tourism. But there is a bad side to it, and the negative impacts. If you don't actually manage well, tourism can actually destroy the assets on which it depends, can destroy the cultural values, can lead to loss of local identity and values. It can create what I mentioned this morning, over-tourism. Local residents are reacting negatively because they see their own life negatively affected. Here are just a few examples. Venice. Venice has got 60,000 inhabitants and 30 million tourists every year. So the local government tried to install turnstiles to limit the massive tourist flows. We have example of a group of South European cities that actually put together a network against tourism. That would seem unbelievable. We have Philippines that shutting down a famous beach. By the way, these beaches are open again. After 6 months remain shut, they were able to recover some of the environmental parameters. Now it's open again to tourism. Mm-hmm. The famous Thailand's Maya Bay, where Leonardo DiCaprio was one of the first movies he played as a young actor, had to shut down as well. And you have cities like Dubrovnik where too many cruises are actually impacting negatively on the city. So the answer to that again is sustainable tourism, which means in fact what we understand is a form of taking into account all the environmental, social and economic impact and try to something that is a win-win situation for everybody, for the resident population, for the industry, for the environment and for the workers as well. So this is where step in the Global Sustainable Tourist Council, the organization that was founded in 2010 and is a non-profit organization registered in the United States, was as a global objective that was promoting sustainable tourism. Now, our members are not only NGOs. We have NGOs, we have academies, we have United Nations agency, but we have big tourist players. Royal Caribbean, the second largest cruising company in the world. TUI, the first largest tour operators in the world, in Europe. So why these big organizations are joining a Global Sustainable Tourist Council? because they see if they want to continue business in the next 10, 20 years, they have to preserve the destination where they're sending their tourists. Otherwise, there will be no business for them anymore. So the core of our business has been creating the criteria or standards, which we did develop through a large public consultation. And basically, we developed a few sets for hotels, tour operators, industry, a large, and destinations. And these criteria are now translated in over 20 different languages. Here you can find in our website the Chinese version. If I understand, there are two Chinese versions, the Mandarin Classic and the more normal version, and you can find them in our web. And basically then what the criteria are saying are basically a few set of recommendations on destination management, on how to reduce the negative impact on cultural and host communities, how to take into account cultural to visitor management, protection of cultural heritage, etc. And finally, how to deal with environmental issues, reducing climate change, energy conservations, etc., etc. So what we do, we basically, based on our standards, we do assess destinations. We basically send our expert and tell the destinations, look, you're doing good on a few things, but you do better on some other things. And we deliver to the manager of the destination a graphic like this, telling them you must improve energy conservation, you must improve internal transport, access, accessibility, etc. And then we do, I think, an important, unique work with certification bodies. In tourism, there are many certification bodies, but they cover only a small portion of the tourist businesses. So we have founded what we call an accreditation program, which is basically assessing all the certification bodies and determining whether they meet the global sustainable tourist criteria. If they do receive an accreditation seal, which they can then show publicly as a market access. And why? Eco-labeling is important today. You see, for example, organic coffee today, you go to IKEA, and most of the wood is certified. But in the tourist sector, because it is more difficult, it's not just a good, it's a chain, and it's a complex chain. So certifying and eco-labeling becomes more difficult. But even then, I think we were able to engage. I mentioned TUI. Now, over 70% of the TUI hotels are certified by a certified program which is accredited by the GSTC. We have a Royal Caribbean that pledged by the end of this year that all their tour in the destinations they go will be handled by sustainable tour operators. We have capacity building, some 500 trainees only the first half of 2018, many of them in Asia. I would like to say that GSTC has a strong presence in Asia, in Indonesia, in Thailand, in Taiwan, in China. So I'm really glad to be here today and to be in contact with such influential people like you're here today to get to know my organization and look forward to continue talking with all of you. So some final consideration then. Sustainability is not an option, it is a necessity. But we all say about it, but not everyone is actually applying it. And I think the key words, we have to focus not on the quantity. It's not important to say we receive 10 million tourists, but the quality of the tourism. How much money are they living? How much are they benefiting the local communities? There is a demand for authentic and sustainable tourist products. So let's respond to that demand. Let the tourists know that your destination is sustainable and let them choose and maybe pay more for that destination, and then communicate how a sustainable vacation is more enjoyable than a non-sustainable one. And finally, get everyone involved, from the big companies investing to the local stakeholders, to the tour guide, to the taxi drivers, etc., etc. It is important that everyone has a say in a tourist strategy in a destination. Well, that's it. I hope I've not taken too much of your time. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Cabrini. From the presentation, I could see there are quite a lot of different criteria and challenges that we face according to sustainable tourism. What are the major issues that are the most imminent, the most challenging one?
Yeah, I would like to list two, in my opinion. One is the global warming. That's clearly, we're seeing every day. Well, in Europe last week, we registered 43 degrees in some cities that at 37 degrees was the highest record. I mean, so this is a fact. And tourism, we did an analysis, tourists contribute 5% of those emissions. So we have a task ahead of us, and the tourist sector must reduce those emissions. So this is really a must. Second is the issue of over-tourism, overcrowding.
Overcrowding.
Yeah. More and more cities, I mentioned a few examples. I don't know well Hong Kong, but Hong Kong has a
like
limited
Venice,
territorial space, and you have a lot of tourists coming in. And you may think, well, this is not happening. We're not like Venice, won't happen. But be careful, because things have to be prevented, because it's much more difficult to solve the problem afterward than to prevent them. So, see, these are two key issues, in my view, in the tourism industry today.
So it's quite important to think ahead.
Think ahead, managing, I would say, not let things go on their own is the only response to me.
Okay, so the last question. We have a wide spectrum of industry here in our academy. So what we can do to enhance sustainable tourism? What we can do, because we are from all the industries in Hong Kong.
I met a few CEOs from different companies, investor, real estate, and technologies. You know, tourism is probably the most transversal sector exists today, because it has to do with almost every from building hotels to infrastructure to leisure parks, etc. So I think there is an opportunity for everyone to be able to do its part. When an investors lend its money, let's make sure that that company, that group, invests sustainably. And I think by that we will be also, I think, doing good for the sustainable tourism as well.
Yeah, I think the most important keyword will be participation. I think tonight we are thanks to Mr. Cabrini for bringing us the insight for the sustainable tourism. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you.